Hi. Well, tonight is a different kind of a night. I'm going to give you a trifecta. There's three people who are going to speak tonight. You're going to see clips of. The first is Dr. Michael Welsh, who's going to talk about family of origin issues. Then Reverend Roger Petersohn is going to talk also about family of origin. And then Dr. Rick Walston is going to talk about a situation. Now, we showed the clip in the service tonight, and we will tomorrow also. But it's so good that I would like you to see it again and to be able to discuss it in your group. So the first is Dr. Michael Welsh, who he and I started discussing these issues of the spiritual growth, the emotional healthy spirituality. Oh my goodness, almost 2 years ago. And much of what I've come to, the conclusion that I've drawn, have come from books he and I read together. So I done a video session with him some weeks ago and have edited some nuggets out that I think are going to be very good.
I grew up in a family that was mostly devoid of emotional expression. And I think that has a fair amount to do with my tendency to want to approach areas of my life and even growth as a Christian and my faith in God, to even approach those areas wanting to be in control. And that I've come to learn that wanting to be in control and being in control really limits the depth of a spiritual journey. I'm trying to unlearn how to be in control of my life. I've spent most of my life trying to learn how to be more in control. And so it turns out that that doesn't deepen my faith, and that doesn't give me more freedom. It doesn't give me more joy. And as I'm learning to be less in control, as I'm learning to try to look out and understand God's direction and to have less expectations, I find that I'm growing in my satisfaction and growing in my expectation for every day and the new things that come with that. I've had a tendency in my life to see an issue, see a problem, and want to fix it as soon as possible. And I'm learning to have more patience, both in looking at issues and looking at problems that may confront me or may confront someone else that is an important person in my life. And I'm learning to look at these problems in a more broad perspective and to note that a problem that someone else may have that's important in my life is also an opportunity for me to grow, an opportunity for me to learn. And much to my disliking, some of the time, those lessons aren't to be learned quickly. Those lessons are something that evolve over time. They're something that take patience. They're something that take thought and understanding. And it's a journey, not an episode.
Well, the next clip is one that Roger and I made last week in talking about his family of origin issues and what he was taught, what he learned inadvertently through his childhood, and how it's affected his life.
I remember when Kyle was about 3 or 4, and I was frustrated with something he was doing as a kid. He was making, normal kid stuff. And I yelled at him, and this is 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and I was yelling at him and continuing to yell at him, and I was looking down at him, and he looked up at me, and his eyes were wide open. He was scared. And somewhere in the middle of that, it hit me, and instead of seeing Kyle, I saw myself. And I saw myself being yelled at by my dad and feeling scared. And I realized at that point, probably in one of the most clearest moments, that the anger that I had been so scared of, I had learned. And it had become who I was. And so my dad's anger became my anger. My dad's moodiness. My dad was notorious for getting into moods that would last for weeks. And I saw that showing up in my marriage as well. It wasn't weeks, it was days, but it was still this weight, this mood that I got into that really overshadowed the whole family for days at a time. And it took really years of work to improve that. I'm amazed at how much I unintentionally learned. I mean, we all learn, us guys, we learn to shave our face a certain way, a certain pattern. We dry off after a shower with a certain pattern. We brush our teeth in a certain order. We learn a whole bunch of things unintentionally. And what I found is that I unintentionally learned anger from my dad. The difference, what I'm finding, is that, if I wanted to change the way I shaved, I would just, it's not tied to any decision. It's not tied to an injury. It's just how I ended up doing. So all I would need to do is just to learn to shave a different direction or a different pattern and just do it enough to where it became the pattern. But the anger that I find in me sometimes, it's anchored to my history with my dad. And what I'm finding is that I have to go back and really understand it. I have to revisit those injuries. I have to talk it through and untangle those knots and heal and just fill in those gaps. And then I'm really more freed up to make conscious decisions to baby step forward and make changes in my behavior with the people I love. Having thought about the reality that I really have picked up on my dad's anger and the whole thing with Kyle and seeing me in his eyes, I've realized now that they're teenagers, it does not shock me that they both have some anger issues. It's been sad, but at least I know where it comes from. At least I know the road to go down. I know the conversations now to have with them to help them unpack that anger and allow myself to be sort of the place they got it from, and let it be okay that they struggle, not okay that they sin, but those conversations now I know are going to unravel it for them and hopefully save them years and years of struggle in their marriages as we talk it out now, even before that dysfunction hardens and develops into patterns that would be much harder to break later on.
And finally is Dr. Rick Walston, who did a clip for me this week about a childhood issue, and we started the sermon with it this weekend. But it's so good, I wanted you to see it again. I wanted you to be able to talk about it and to see whether it touches any buttons in your life about things that happened from childhood.
In our series, we've been talking about various things, and one of the things that came up was we have to go back sometimes before we can go forward. And this came home to me pretty powerfully just, 8 weeks or so ago. I had a situation where I was offended by somebody, and the thing is I didn't really even know the person very well. And the offense that he gave to me, or that he offended me with, was a minor thing. So typically when something like that happens, you just slough it off and go, no big deal, because he's not somebody I know, there's no investment. But for whatever reason, it really bothered me. And I remember thinking throughout the day, this thing kept coming back to my mind, and even at night, I had a hard time sleeping. I would toss and turn, I would think about it. And I was shocked and surprised that I let this thing bother me so much. And that was the key for me. I didn't understand why it bothered me so much, so I started praying about it. And as I was praying, I felt like God reminded me of a situation that was quite similar to this situation when I was 10 years old. At 10 years old, though, I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know what to do. I talked to an adult. They said it's no big deal. But see, as a 10-year-old, the emotion was a big deal. But I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know to forgive the person. So I just stuffed it down and went on with my life. And now, all these years later, 40-some-odd years later, I come to a situation that was quite similar. And I'd forgotten the 10-year-old incident, or the incident when I was 10 years old, and I'd forgotten that incident, but now this other thing came out, and as I was praying, as I said, God reminded me of that earlier thing. And all of a sudden, the emotion made sense now. The anger that I felt, the worry that I felt, the anxiety that I felt was because I was dragging this situation from my childhood into my present situation. The incident really wasn't a very big deal. But as a 10-year-old child, it was a big deal, and I had never dealt with it. So then I prayed and forgave that person who offended me when I was 10, who, by the way, is long since dead. He was an older man, and it wasn't a big deal now that I look back on it. But he's gone, and so I forgave him even though he's dead and gone. Now I was able to then address the present situation and forgive the person, and immediately felt freedom and peace from it. The interesting thing here is that I had to go back before I could go forward. And the minute I did, and the minute I dealt with the past, it was easy to deal with the present. But another part of this that's interesting is that I was shocked, as I said earlier, at how it bothered me, which told me I really didn't even know my own heart very well. The imposter part of me that put up the facade and stuffed down the emotions had controlled even my own thinking. And so, whereas if somebody else were offended by something like that, I would be surprised perhaps that they were offended by something so small. I was also surprised that I was offended by something so small, but there was a reason for it. The past, stuffing down the emotions, not dealing with them, and then finally dealing with them, and I was able to deal with it presently. So two main things: going back to go forward is a legitimate thing that we have to do in many cases, and the fact that sometimes we don't even know ourselves. And these sorts of things that come up help us realize who we are and what we've hidden over the years.
So that's it for me tonight. I pray that this weekend, as we've talked about going back to go forward, perhaps there are some issues or circumstances, situations of your life that you'll be able to reinterpret. And maybe for the first time see how God has worked in these things to produce in you something good, or to perhaps rethink family of origin issues that will help you forgive, to put these things behind you. So I pray tonight in your discussion, as you rethink these things, that God will have opportunity to cleanse, to clean, to heal. So God's blessings to you tonight. Keep the faith.
This is where the healing begins.